President Harris is pressing forward with her media blitz, this time focusing on winning over the black vote, especially black male voters. She's been on a number of podcasts and interviews recently focused on the black community. And later today, she'll be part of that radio town hall with Charlamagne tha God, the host of the popular show, The Breakfast Club. I want to bring in April Ryan, senior White House correspondent for The Grio, and Brakkton Booker, Politico correspondent. April, what does this push to win over uncommitted black voters tell you about how the Harris campaign sees the race right now?
By any means necessary, to take a quote from Malcolm X. Bottom line, there is voter apathy out here. Voter apathy is a problem in every election, but right now, the issue is trying to get those undecided or those black voters who want to sit home and think that there's no way to help them or no way to fix the problem, that they don't make a difference. And I just can't help but think about history, that each vote counts. And in Baltimore City, many years ago, when Kweisi Mfume, now Maryland congressman, ran for city council, he won his election by 3 votes. And this reminds me of that moment. Kamala Harris is trying to pull every black vote, pull every vote she can. And for her to identify as a black woman, and there's still a number of black men, black women, still sitting on the sidelines, either undecided or saying they're not going to vote. She's trying to rally that, and she's meeting them where they are, with Charlamagne tha God today, in Detroit specifically, a place specifically, Dearborn, in Michigan, in the Michigan area, that there is concern about her. There is concern about the Democratic Party, particularly in another issue with the Israel-Gaza war. So she's going there to go head on into the fire and try to persuade black people, look, this is the better option than sitting out and then having Donald Trump as president.
She's trying to talk to them directly here, Brakkton. The Charlamagne interview there in Detroit is where you are right now. You recently spoke to about 36 black Detroiters, and they told you they're concerned about the Harris campaign's outreach to black voters. What exactly are their concerns?
Well, concern primarily that they haven't been reached out to. They feel like a lot of times the campaign has spent more time courting other portions of the Democratic constituency, whether it be suburban white women or, like what April said, trying to shore up some voters from Arab and Muslim communities who have been upset with the current administration's stance on the Israel-Gaza war. So this presents another opportunity for her to go face-to-face with black voters, in particular Charlamagne tha God, who is known to ask some tough questions of the vice president. They are friendly. They have a relationship, but they know that Charlamagne tha God will ask some tough questions of the vice president and kind of put her on the defense maybe about why it took so long to make this last minute outreach with just a little over 20 days left in the campaign.
Brakkton, we put up a poll earlier showing that vice president still overwhelmingly has the black voter support. However, it has slipped from 2016, it's down from 2020, and where those exit polls showed the black vote breaking towards the Dems. Is there something about Trump's messaging that's working for him with black voters there in Michigan?
I think there's a combination of things at work here. It's not just Trump's message, which is really aimed at working class voters. And yes, black people are also part of working class voters. Just because you're black does not mean you're going to automatically vote for the Democratic Party. And I think Democrats are starting to wake up to that reality and have to really fine tune that message about what it is that they will do policy wise to bring back the working class vote. But I also think that it's what I said earlier, is that a lot of black folks feel like the Democratic Party have taken black voters, black men in particular, have taken them for granted. And instead of saying what their policies are to attract black voters, they are kind of talking to black men as if they need to be guilted or shamed into voting for the Democrats. That's certainly what we saw surface last week with former President Obama's comments in Pittsburgh. Some folks took offense to that. Others, I will say, said like, hey, that's what black folks need to hear. They need to hear some tough talk. So I think it's all about tone, but I think there's a combination of things at play here. And it's not just that it's Donald Trump's policies that are endearing him to some black voters.
And speaking of those Barack Obama comments, April, a reminder of what he said about why Vice President Harris isn't seeing the ground level enthusiasm that he saw in 2008. Here's what he said.
We have not yet seen the same kinds of energy and turnout in all quarters of our neighborhoods and communities as we saw when I was running. Now, I also want to say that seems to be more pronounced with the brothers.
So Vice President Harris was asked about those comments, and this is what she had to say.
Do you think that what President Obama said was the right thing to say?
Let me tell you, I am very proud to have the support of President Obama. Like, as I said, I intend to earn the vote of everyone, including black men. 2, pay attention to everything that President Obama talked about, because he also talked about, at length, the danger of Donald Trump.
What did you make of her answer there, April?
The danger of Donald Trump. Don't be seduced. Don't be entertained into thinking that this man is for you. And part of the allure of Donald Trump beyond entertainment is the fact that he, in some ways, people think that he breaks politics down. It's not as cerebral. Because part of the problem is many of us do not understand civics. How about that? And he talks in a language that people understand. And sometimes you can't go so highbrow in some areas, and you have to just put it right there. And I believe Barack Obama did put it there. And the vice president is indeed thankful for the support. But then you have other people who feel like Barack Obama talked at them. But either way, the issue is hitting people where they are. And that's the piece. There is a disconnect with black men. And some of that is because black women are the ones who normally go to the polls, who normally activate for the Democratic Party. And along the way, the concerns, the conversations with black men fell to the wayside. So now you have not just Kamala Harris, not just Charlemagne, not just the president, Susan Rice, and others, and also the Divine Nine and HBCUs and others trying to go out and reach black men as well as black women to get them to the polls this election cycle.
April Ryan and Braxton Booker, thank you both very much for being part of this conversation.